Keith James of 3ndless 3rth Today we're talking to everyone about milling logs, taking logs and turning them into lumber or slabs for tables. Topics we're going to talk about is tree identification, like what you want to look for what would you even want to mill to begin with, and why would you even want that for your job or your project that you're working on. We'll go over how to mill with a bandsaw mill, the setup, the loading, turning of the log, and then pulling off the boards, drying and curing the logs. And then we'll do the chainsaw mill. From there, the setup, like a very simple system that we have to set up the logs for the first cut, sharpening the chain, and then about how to get the slabs off the log if they're extremely heavy, and then same thing about drying and storing them. So first thing to go over is tree identification. We have a lot of dead, burnt trees. This pine right here is like a good example of something that you might not want to mill if you don't have a lot of time or energy, or if you don't have a lot of money for blades and stuff. Like normally, if I was out on a job, I would tell somebody not gonna mill this. And you guys can kind of look at this over there. And then it's the same piece of wood. But this portion right here where it's kind of like pulling out, that's dry on that side. Where it's kind of actually pulling out, that's all rotten wood. So this section right here, and then sometimes you'll see like a discoloring, like these lines will come in, and that's pretty much rotten. But we can still mill around here and still get some boards out of this. And we're not sure exactly what we're gonna do with this wood. It's not gonna be for siding or for anything structural. We might even use it for like a stage, like a bigger outdoor stage area, for form boards for some of our buildings with rammed earth or adobe. So we'll still mill this, but something you can look at even when you're cutting into the ends of the log is the sawdust. You can see the different colors here. Like this is kind of more of a vibrant color. You have like a darker color like this, and then especially on the chips from your chainsaw, like these bigger chunks is what you want to like see get pulled out, and like the ones that are really dirty, and I'll show you guys over there later, that are like really small and like just feel like they're falling apart. If you're getting those like flying off the end of your saw when you're cutting, you're probably not going to want to mill that log at all. A lot of these logs, we had like 400 logs already decked up here on the property. Like half of them were just already rotten. Like this was years ago. 200 of the cedar logs, out of those we only milled up I think 140 of those logs, or sorry, that were quality enough to do anything with. We milled up maybe only 70 to 80 of those logs, and then the rest are going to be used for building just as is, because the diameter of the log is pretty small. This is probably about the smallest log that I normally mill, because I have so much wood to go through. There's so much wood around here. You put up a log, it's a lot of energy just to cut into a square and then you get boards. So why put up a log that's smaller versus you put a bigger log? It doesn't take much more energy to get it to make boards, but you end up with twice as many boards. The bigger log doesn't take twice as much energy to make it happen though. So for up here we have pine, Doug fir, and cedar is what you're typically going to be building with. That's very prominent. The same thing like when you're cutting through, you also have oak, but people tend to not use it a whole lot. But as you're cutting through, most of the pine and the Doug fir isn't going to be hollow in the middle. You'll get some cedar that's like pecky wood, and it's kind of soft like that, but it's not like rotting. It's just like more of a dehydrated decay, and you can still build. You could probably seen pecky cedar like boards at the store, lumberyard, Sycamore. Have you ever seen that? Mm-hmm. So like that's still okay, but if you had like pecky, what would be terms of like that rotten pine, then you're not gonna like want to use that whatsoever. And then the oak will have a lot of hollow in the middle, and a lot of times just purely rotten all throughout the center. But you can still mill that if you want it, and you can always fill with epoxy if you want to do a slab table or something more unique like that. Have any questions about that? I mean, it's hard to like tell. Like we'll look a little bit more over there. There's one log let's walk over there for a quick and maybe a bit. And then you can put that
dark piece.
Yeah, this is easy to see on this one right here. We have these lines going through it, like that, and then this kind of dark color here. And then you can always just take like a screwdriver and like poke it in. It feels like it just goes right through. And no good. I mean, normally people out there who are milling a lot of wood in the industry wouldn't even mess with these logs because they're buying their wood. Since we're getting all this for free, then we're gonna use it, and it's here, and we want to be able to not have logging trucks come down our land when we have wood that's right here on site. Normally people wouldn't really talk about, like, they're like, this is just junk wood. And yeah, like something like this, obviously we're not gonna like mill that. But I've had logs that are like that on the outside the sapwood, and you still get a 12 by 12 or 15 by 15 cant, and you still get a bunch of good boards in the heartwood. Like some of these logs that we milled up in the very center, like 8 to 12 inches, are gonna be good wood to use for stuff. The outside of it is a lot, probably no good though. So we'll talk about this Woodmizer LT40. It's like middle to higher end. Like people use this for production, like people who want to just mill, like that's their whole entire business. Will still buy this mill, but normally with hydraulics. Everything on this mill is manual though, but we kind of cheat a lot. Like we got the skid steer to grab stuff and just put it right on the mill. We use a PV to turn the log, but we'll cheat to use the skid steer instead of manually turning it. We'll cheat with that. And then we got a couple other electric things hooked up, so it just speeds up the process. But generally, we got just a blade that's gonna cut through the log here. We got a debarker, and then the control station out back. It does everything from raising and lowering to going forward and backwards. Everyone to come over here, see how it all runs, and you can like press a setting, and it all like computerized. It'll raise it. You can have a thing to bring the board back to you automatically, and then after it comes back, it'll go back to the next cut. So if you want 3/4 inch boards, it'll go 3/4 down every single time. So you just press a button and it goes to the next cut, the next cut. That's why it's like exactly what you want it to do. This, you can cut like 16th inch boards if you wanted to, all the way to 14-inch boards. There's like a wide range, and this does really good for giving you pretty straight cuts, but it is just a single tracked bandsaw blade, and the blade can like flex and move, so it's not like the most perfect thing possible, but you get more boards than you would from a chainsaw, because like a chainsaw, every single time you cut it, you lose 3/8 of an inch. So you do a cut, you know, I mean, let's just call it a half an inch. So 2 cuts, you lose an inch of wood. So versus this, it's less than a 16th of an inch when you cut it through. And all this sawdust is good to use for composting toilets for in your garden beds because it's all water cooled. Versus a chainsaw, you're using oil to cool the chain down and to lubricate it as it passes, because it's metal, through the groove of it. So you never want to use the sawdust from a chainsaw mill, because it's got, if you're milling up one log, you might go with a big saw like that, you might go through like 1/3 of a gallon of oil. So now you're mixing in 1/3 of a gallon of oil into your compost. It's not something you really want. But you can put vegetable oil into your chainsaw instead of using the regular traditional hydro-based oil. And you can just use fryer oil and just through a strainer. Because like oil that we buy, because we don't have it all set up, is like $27 or $24 a gallon, versus you get free oil. And if it's not like what you want exactly, you can just put an emulsifier in, or you can mix a little bit of other types of oils in with it. Most people, I remember friends like, oh, this is awesome, we have all this sawdust. And they're like, no, don't use it. You can't use it. Something to think about. So the mill sets up really easily. It's on a trailer, toes behind. These little outriggers right here are adjustable, and we can pull it to the spot, pull these pins, the legs slide out after you do the first one, and you're level in like 5 minutes if you have some help. 10 minutes if it's not like perfectly level ground. But if it's already pretty level, and doesn't have to be perfect to start cutting. If you're going to be there for a long time, you might as well get it perfectly level. Just one thing is you always want to have it slightly going downhill. You never want to try to be doing the sawmill uphill because it has to pull through the wood. It just has a small electric engine that goes on a chain driven system to go forward and backwards, and then it's a chain driven to go up and down. So you don't want to have the mill also leaning forward. So if you have your log on there and you take the dog off, the log could roll on you. So you want it slightly biased inward towards the uprights and then slightly biased going downhill. So that's pretty much the setup. Blocking off the tires as well, you get some less rock. You can also take some air out of the tires so there's more surface area. And then the last thing is this blade tensioner. It's like really pivotal to keep the tension in this orange range. You can go a little bit past it, about 2,500. You have to watch it as the sun hits it, changes and expands the oil, so you get more pressure on the blade. And you can actually like over tighten it, and then it stretches too far, and then your blade will actually break. So as the day goes on, you have to keep on watching this gauge. And I think we don't have that much time to mill today, so I think we'll kind of mostly tackle those things, but something to be aware of as things go along. So that's pretty much everything on setting up. You guys have any questions? Good. All right, then the loading of a log is pretty simple, but there's like points afterwards. So the uprights are over here. And one thing, you come over here, Sam?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, these rollers right here is what keeps the log from coming up and over when you roll the log to do the second cut. So we're gonna do one cut here, and then we'll roll the log, and these rollers actually help it slide down. And some sawmills, even if you don't have a Woodmizer, don't come with these. I just highly recommend putting them on there, because before we would spend like half hour sometimes with big logs, because they would just get stuck on these, and it doesn't just roll back down. And I've had logs actually come to this side of the mill, like you went and it goes up and over them. So you always have to have these like perfectly vertical. If there's just slightly down, then it actually can push down. And even when they are upright, sometimes things happen and they'll get trapped and they'll slide all the way down below here. And then there's a dog over on that side. I'll show that in a little bit. That's just to keep it nice and secure. So when you're milling, like the torque of the engine can actually pull the whole log over. So the log sits up against these uprights and then gets trapped with that dog, so the log can't go anywhere as you're cutting through. And then one thing we'll do here after kind of talk is level the log. So the center of the log, so you measure from this point to the center of the log, let's say that's 12 inches. On the other end, you also want it to be 12 inches. That way all your boards are going through the same plane. If you had a log like this and you're cutting, it's not going to go through the same plane. And especially with the chainsaw mill, it's going to end up getting really bad looking boards, and you got a lot of peeling of the wood. And you're just not going to get as many boards as you would like to as well. So you're going to spend a lot of energy mostly on the chainsaw mill. You can get away with it, but you're going to get better drying, less warpage with this, especially if most people air dry. Most boards out there you buy from Lowe's and stuff are going to be kiln dried. Most people don't have that capacity, so they're going to air dry. So you want to have every single board as straight as you possibly can when it comes off the mill. You're going to aim small, miss small. And then bought this debarker attachment for this mill. Kind of show a video of it running later, but that just helps peel a little groove right in front of the blade every single time you cut. And the blades will get dull really quickly. Like this Doug fir log there with all that bark on it, I've tried to mill without peeling it before, and I haven't even gone through a whole log without having to change the blade, because it dulls it so quickly. It's like the bark, especially when the log is kind of a little bit rotten, it dulls it extremely fast because there's more mineral content in there. When you have it nice and peeled, sometimes we'll even pressure wash the logs before we mill. That way it's nice and clean and you're not gonna have to dull as much blades. And I was talking to everyone earlier, you just lose a lot of momentum. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to change out a blade, but it just feels like momentum is lost. And then you go through 10 blades and you only have 10 blades, then you have to wait a week for them to get sharpened. So I like to keep the blades lasting as long as possible. That debarker attachment costs $2,000, which is, considering the price that I got the mill for, is this large portion what I paid for the mill. Like that Doug fir log, it might take an hour to peel it to have it perfectly clear, versus you just put it on there and you don't have to peel it at all. Like, you might be able to mill that log in an hour. So peeling it versus not peeling it, just put it on there, you just saved an hour potentially of your time. So next thing, just about turning the log. We'll kind of just talk about that as we do a couple more cuts. Chain, that way the dog can't move, stays chained down. And then one other thing, kind of just focusing on, is keeping like a safe work site environment. I mean, when I first started, the gate was a mess. I actually lost one of these bars. So we milled like 70 logs in the pile of, like, we ended up where the mill was like this high, like in front of the mill, because of all the bark and stuff we weren't like cleaning up. And I almost had to get a metal detector out just to find that bar. So keeping potential trip hazards, we just say, out of the way, just even that block of wood right there, like trip over it, fall. I tripped earlier, another piece of dunnage yesterday, haven't done that in a while, so always becoming aware and minimizing the risk of falling, tripping on things. So have everyone stand behind the mill and we'll do the first step. Flash pile. Finally, it's the first time I ever did it correctly, where I just took some dunnage down there. We have these chokers here, and then we put up a post, like we had a cedar tree, just protected the cedar tree. That way when we're done with all of this milling from this site, we'll hook up these chokers together, lift this whole pile, and move it to where we want to go. Or you can cut up into firewood a lot easier if you want to choose firewood. Or if somebody wanted this, I think this guy is using a garden beds for an acre, raised garden beds with slash. So something like that would be just pick it up, put it right in his trailer, see you later. So this is actually pretty decent wood. You have like a little bit of rotten spot right here. Normally, like, you could have got another board out of that, so I could cut it up higher. So normally you would kind of look at the back, grab a tape measure here, look at the back of the log that you're facing at. Ideally having the bigger end on like the big logs is nice, but the small end otherwise. Big end, just so you can actually know how wide and how low you can go for the first cut. But you would just take this tape measure, so we have, just right here is 12 inches. So you basically want to have a square drawn. So we have 12 inches there, and if I went pretty much vertical, I got like 13 and a half. So if I went another cut, it would be over here. and went from there. We have about 12 3/4, and that's about 13 1/4. So maybe just slightly up. So there's not really much use of doing one more cut. This is pretty good. And then if you draw this line here, you would see how much is going to come off on the next cut. And if you wanted to, you could take one cut, and one cut, all 1-inch boards. And if you didn't really want to use those, you don't want to cut it up the edges to make, like, all you wanted was just boards. You could take those and cut them again to make your stickers stack in between, so you don't have to go buy stickers, you cut your own stickers. And one caveat to that, you always want to have dry stickers, because the moisture needs to go into the wood. If your board is 80% moisture, your sticker is 80% moisture, you're going to get rot and fungus growth from in there. So you want to have your stickers dry before you stack. So there's a lot of ways. I mean, it all kind of depends on how much wood and what you're going to use for your slash. Like, we wanted to build a lot with our cedar slash, this siding for outbuildings, wood sheds, barns, even like a goat barn or something, just use the slash right up there. So it's okay that we get a little bit more wood on them, because then we have that, and it's going to last a lot longer. Just have nice 3 or 4 inch thick cedar slash siding that's going to last for a long time out in the elements, versus just a tiny little piece that's going to rot right through. So you can take off as many boards as you want to. Like, where to go the first cut, kind of have to feel it out. There's some guessing, and then you kind of, the more you do it, the better you get. And yeah, time as well. Like, if we have, 300 logs to mill, and you're sitting here milling off every single board on stuff that's not even that good of wood, I'll tell you why it's not very good, these top cuts, versus you got all these other logs, and then 3 years when you finally get to go, if you're not milling all the time, they're just rotten. Like, what use was that, spending all this time? These boards on the outside, if you look at the growth rings, this is like the furthest that they're gonna have an angle is up here. So the angle of the growth rings is like this. You see that at all? So these boards are gonna want to cup, and they're gonna want to go like this. You've seen those boards at Lowe's before? They go like, whoop. Yep. Those are mostly from the top boards, versus these boards here, this section here, the growth rings are more vertical. And people turn a lot, and they can do a lot of different things when milling to get the best boards possible. I mostly just made it square and then milled it from there. And these top boards mostly either mill thick or used for stickers, or for your coal pile, which is just going to be used for random projects that don't need to be perfect. So we'll flip this log and then pretty much just cut it right here to a straight line across, and then cut this over here. It'll end up with a decent square. And it doesn't go in like much very deep either. It's a pretty, I'm pretty new to using it. I've had it for a while, but I haven't got the electronic setup until just recently. So yeah, this is very helpful. And yeah, just we'll kind of go with the log, and then
so you just get it close, and then it kind of does its own thing.
Yeah, it would be kind of hard to like.
That's why I was watching. I was like, man, if you're controlling that takes a lot of time to get that good with it.
Yeah, and another like control, just like the forward and backwards, you kind of just have a feel for it as you're going into it. But like after 2 days, like you kind of get the hang of how things are gonna go.
Does it pull itself, or are you actually pushing it?
What the? Oh, it's a motor, so it's all on the tracking guides. And even if you didn't have it motorized, you can do a couple things. Like a manual is the guide blades can be offset. I don't remember which direction, but it actually, because of that offset, it actually will pull the whole mill through the wood, just like a chainsaw. When you set the teeth, and it actually will kind of yank you down. It'll do the same concept. And there's a hook to the blade, the way it's angled, that actually will pull itself through a little bit as well. But I've had it set up where it's just slightly off, like maybe 1/8 of an inch per foot, and I couldn't push the mill, or less than that, maybe like a 1/16, and I couldn't even push the mill through really at all. We're going to talk about it real quick. So put a piece of pie in here, keep the log stay still, and then this is the dog right here. It's got little adjustments, and we sink it in there pretty good. If it's not like usable, really nice live edge, we'll just crank it in there hard. Kurt, you can slide it out of there. Pull it out. I made this PV from a really nice wooden handle PV, but since we've been using the skid steer and not human power, it bent on us. So just welded in this pipe, and it's been working pretty good. It's definitely heavy, but we're not using it too much. With kind of rotten logs, you want to find a point where it connects to a knot, and that's going to sink in a lot better. So you hold this little hook back, and you grab the end and you throw it in. And then you give it a little pull like this to sink it in. Since this one is pretty light, we'll kind of show you guys just how to do manually. And you want to have this rolled so it's 90 degrees against the uprights. So Kurt and I will kind of roll it.
The other hand. About 5 more, 7 more degrees. Right, hold it right there. Reset the dog. Just for better leverage. Right there. Hold it there, and then we'll put the dog in place.
And then from here, check level again. If your board stayed in while you're turning it, then you're probably good to go. So check this side first.
Are you gonna sit down there?
It's what he's answering right now, actually.
And I got about 7.5 logs. Come to find out, aren't always straight. I have curves. This one looks like it curved down a bit. And there's like little things you can cheat with. This is 8.5. If this is kind of sitting up higher, I can pull this out. Didn't help us too much, but sometimes that'll just drop down. Now we're 8.5. Turn. Wait. 8, so we're just like a 1/4 inch off. That's not that big a deal, so we'll just go for that. And then, since we got a good sinkage on the dog, we'll just leave that right there. Okay. I'm gonna probably need to get that one.
Want your line rack in?
Yeah.
Those are up.
That's good right there, Dan. So you can measure from the back. About 14 inches. So that measurement, then I'll come over here. There's a little scale. Did you see that scale? Yeah.
I don't know how to read it, man.
So it is these lines and this measurement mark right there. So it's pretty big. We're gonna go 14 inches. And sometimes when I look at it, I get all like, oh crap, we're measuring, cutting off too much. No, just a little bit right there.
Too soon.
Hatchet happy.
Moved off right there.
Yeah.
So if you look at some of these trees, you got like that one right here, birch, it's like curving, right? So that very outer piece of wood is wanting to go out more than maybe the inside one. So it's staying kind of put though because it's growing around the whole tree. So like this log has a curve to it. The moment you cut, you release that tension. I've had like these pieces of slash actually like bang and hit against the mill like 4 inches after you cut them because there was a lot of tension in the wood. And even on the back end, like sometimes if the curve is that way and you cut it, like it'll start lifting 2 inches off even when it's still attached partially because that's the way it wanted to go. It was trying to get out of Dodge can go, but the whole rest of the log is holding it on. And some people with like really good wood, they'll like turn it every single cut, once it's even square, to equally relieve the pressure of the wood. As you go one board and then one board, one board and one board, go back and forth.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time, like to turn it every single time versus just cut it all the way through. I want to give a 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And this is good looking. We got maybe some nice blue stain in the middle of this log here too.
What?
So there's a beetle that is around this area called the bark beetle, and when it goes into the wood, it's carrying a fungus, and it'll leave the fungus into the wood.
That's what kills the tree.
I'm not sure what exactly
Like a harpoon.
is killing the tree, to be honest with you. But there's a fungus that's left residual, and it'll start in the sapwood, and it'll kind of come in and in. So sometimes you'll get the middle of the log, all this blue on the outside, and then the white in the middle is pure white wood. It's really beautiful.
Alright, got it.
It's a combination of bark beetle and fire that's killed all the trees.
Well, yeah, around here mostly.
You good, right, Keith?
A little bit
just
more.
keep going.
And then you can see right here, we'll redog this last surface, and you kind of will check our square, which we're not perfectly square. Yeah.
Uprights aren't very tall. So if they're a little bit taller, you get a truer picture of where like the first cut being perpendicular would be. Since they're kind of short, like they'll be, sometimes you only get the uprights touching the straight part of the wood for like 3 inches. And so that's not going to be square all the time. But you can come over here.
These are the uprights.
Yeah, so these should be technically, this whole thing should be perfectly touching the wood, and this should be, obviously this is like touching on the rail system itself. These should be perfect. We're about like, I don't know, an 1/8 inch off right now. So that's like one thing I don't really like. If they were a little bit taller, extended, and especially if you're not doing like a big cant pieces, you're leaving a little bit of live edge on there, you'll end up with that not perfect.
You'd be able to do bigger logs too, right? Or no?
About the same amount, but you can just get a better picture of where everything's at. Alright, well, like that. And then since you guys are over here, you can just take the tape measure and you can just look at where your cut's going to be. It's about 15 inches right there. Obviously it's shorter down here. So maybe 14 inches for this cut.
I'm gonna do one cut and then do another cut.
pretty good. You feel like the top wood, you can feel like in between the growth rings, like up here, how it's a little bit soft. If you like go down, you get like some good wood on there.
Yeah.
Like I can like
Oh,
even
yeah,
just
for sure.
push my nail like right through that.
Yeah, definitely. Feel the difference.
Yeah. So that's what we'll mostly be cutting off of that.
You'll be cutting like several inches down in here.
Yeah, for like this next one, we'll do a couple. You can use these still for stickers, so we'll put them over there and let them dry, and then we'll use them for stickers. But we'll do the same thing, make a couple more, and then stop once they get into like decent wood. Like over there, there's some wood that needed to get trimmed off, especially have some really big. I think that was the biggest cant ever made, just because of the way we cut it. It was 26 inch by 26 inch. It was really big for this mill, because normally you can only do 24.5 inch max, but the way it turned out, we just got a little bit more. So that's a big log. You can get a lot of boards out of that. Oh, I think out of 4 logs, we built a tiny home shed. So that could be one tree. You could build a whole structure somewhere you can live in.
I think that's so awesome.
As you can take.
Hey, David, just put it to the left side of that, Doug, first.